Good evening, everybody. If you would like, go ahead and open your Bibles up to Luke chapter 23. We'll start in verse 50. But before we look at the new material, we need to pause just for a little bit and think about the monumentous moment that we are in the Bible story. Because we are really at the climax of God's plan for redeeming mankind. We've just had Jesus cry out, "It is finished," and yield up his spirit. And so now his lifeless body hangs on the cross. And I want to just take just a second and read something that Bob Waldron had in his book. It says, "It was an awesome occasion, truly one of the saddest moments in history, if this were the end of the story. Instead, it is the first part of the climax of the whole Bible. Here we need not just a note, but a song, a whole lesson, many lessons, because by the deed we have just studied, all things were accomplished. At this moment, it looked as if Satan had won, as if he was victorious. But Satan had only bruised the heel of the Savior, as predicted in the very first promise ever made, Genesis 3:15. But the story does not end here. Christ will soon crush the head of Satan, as that same promise foretold. His apparent defeat would be turned into a glorious victory. Indeed, by this death, redemption has been purchased. Jesus has nailed to the cross the bond written in ordinances. In other words, he has paid off the promissory note left by every sin which had ever been committed and then repented of until that date. Colossians 2, verse 14. By his death, he put away sin, Hebrews 9:26. He has tasted of death for every man, the very purpose for which he was made a man, Hebrews 2:9. He redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us, Galatians 3:13. The humiliation of Jesus is now past, the task finished, the time for his exaltation is approaching, Philippians 2:5-8. When he arises from the dead, on the third day hence, he will no longer be subject to the will of men. He will be glorified. He will be seated on the right hand of the Father to rule upon the throne of David throughout the entire gospel age, Philippians 2:9-11 and Ephesians 1:20-23. The death of Christ on the cross is the culmination of all ages. It was the plan that only God could have thought of. It was hidden from the world, the mystery of God, until it was done, 1 Corinthians 2:6-8. Even Satan did not know. He played right into God's hands. He carried out his own wicked plan, thinking he was defeating God by killing his son. He sealed his own doom, because by that death, Jesus paid the sacrifice for sin and made it possible for men to be released from the power of Satan, Hebrews 2:14-15. Yet remember, if the story ended here at the death of Christ, it would not be a story of victory. Satan would have indeed won. It would have been of no more significance than the story of any other innocent man who was put to death unjustly. But the story continues. And I think that it is important to pause and to think about it, because as we're going through here, we're clipping along and looking at passage after passage and text after text and getting through the story. But the significance of it is beyond comprehension, really. And so just pausing for a second and think about what's happened right here. What the spiritual world must be thinking right now. We know the apostles are confused about what's taking place. We've got others that are confused, witnesses that were there. The centurion, he's probably confused too. Truly, this was the Son of God. We just killed him. How does that work? And you can imagine that since this was a mystery that even angels desired to look into, the angelic world was looking bewildered as well, thinking, what is taking place right here? And so in today's lesson, we're going to continue that story and start to get a little bit more clarity of why God did this and how this is bringing about that glorious victory. Any thoughts you have before we get into the new material? Anybody else? Okay, so Jesus' body is hanging on the cross. And in Luke chapter 23 and verse 50, it says, "Behold, there was a man named Joseph, a council member, a good and just man. He had not consented to their counsel indeed. He was from Arimathea, a city of the Jews, who himself was waiting for the kingdom of God. So here's somebody, this is interesting because you got the Sanhedrin Council who condemned Jesus, and yet not everybody was in agreement that Jesus should be put to death. Here was one who was a disciple of Jesus, in other words, a follower of Jesus, and did not consent. A just man, a rich man, it tells us in another parallel passage. And so here he is, and in verse 52 it says, this man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Now, at this point, we find out that when Pilate, first of all, he has access to Pilate, probably because of his status as a council member. But he comes to Pilate, he asks for the body of Jesus, and Pilate's surprised that Jesus is already dead. And so he wants to make sure that Jesus is already. By the way, we know the conflict that Pilate has had in putting Jesus to death. And now think about that the message comes, can I have his body because he's dead? He's dead already? He calls for the centurion. I suppose it's the same centurion who said this was truly the Son of God. I don't know. But he calls for a centurion to verify that Jesus is dead. And the report comes back that he is. And so Pilate grants him the body of Jesus. It's interesting to me that who's standing with Jesus at this point? Really no one. And this is probably the first individual that we have that kind of comes forward and claims any relationship. Peter last time, I don't know the man. And here Joseph of Arimathea steps forward and at least accepts some relationship with Jesus and some connection with Jesus on this. So, what's that? Maybe the mourning women as well. Yes, that's true. This is the interesting thing about this whole section. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute. The status of the women in the view of men, and in the view of the culture at the time, let me say it that way, is not even hardly recognized. And so the women could almost get away with this because it was almost as if in society's eyes, their thoughts and view about this wasn't significant enough to register. That was not the way it was with God. And I do think that that's very interesting because, well, we'll get to it in a little bit. But you notice that Jesus has already addressed the women a couple of times in this section, and he's going to do so again in a little bit. But very, very good point. Anything else about that before we look at what Joseph of Arimathea does? All right. So verse 53, he took the body down and he wrapped it in linen. Another one of the texts says that he bought the linen to do so. He was a wealthy man. He buys the linen, and then he laid Jesus in, and it was his own tomb, took the body down, wrapped it in linen, and then placed it in his own hewn-out tomb, which was close thereby. The reason that this is kind of all significant of what's taking place right here is they're in a hurry. They're in a big hurry. Remember, it's the day of preparation. It's getting late. By the way, I want to correct something. So last class, I asked the question, and I should have known. I've known in the past, I believe, but I've forgotten. How long was Jesus on the cross? And Mike Morrow tried to answer that question, and I misunderstood what he was saying. And he was saying from 9 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon was the time that he was hanging on the cross. And I thought he was giving different times from the text that we were looking at as far as when it was dark and that type of thing. And so I made the point that, well, one of the apostles uses Roman time. Another one of Matthew uses Hebrew time, Jewish time on that. I thought that that's where the confusion was. But what he was telling me is, exactly what I asked for, is how long was Jesus on the cross? Well, it was from 9 till 3 in the afternoon, and that's when he died. So I wanted to go back and correct that. Afterwards, he came up to me and he showed me the text, and I was like, I now understand what you're saying. And so I misunderstood him, and I apologize for messing that up. He was giving me the right answer on that. So Jesus is taken down. Back to so it's 3 in the afternoon when he dies. And now the body is asked for. They've got to hurry up and they've got to try to get him buried before the sunset, because at sunset starts the Sabbath and you can't do anything through the Sabbath. And so what are you going to do with a body that you take down and lay out for a whole day? That's not going to be good. And so they want to hurry up and get him buried. But the problem is, I think that's why Joseph of Arimathea springs into action here. He's able to get the body down very quickly, and also he happens to have a tomb that is very close by to where they are crucified that he has for himself. He's had it hewn for himself and probably for his family. No one's ever been in that tomb before. And so you do see the level of commitment that he has and the respect that he has for Jesus, because he goes out and kind of puts himself at risk by asking for the body of Jesus. Then he purchases the materials to have Jesus wrapped, and then he's going to bury Jesus in his own tomb, which no one has ever been buried in before. And so you see the effort that he's taking forth here. Any thoughts on that?
He was treated with a little respect at this time.
Yes.
The only time that he has been.
That's right. There was another character here that has not really come out as a supporter of Jesus, not publicly, until this time as well. Did anybody catch who that was? Nicodemus. Nicodemus, who was a rabbi, a teacher there. And so Nicodemus brings spices to wrap him in. In other words, so the purpose of the spices and everything is they didn't have any type of any way to embalm them or anything of that. At least the Jews didn't practice that. So what they would do is they would kind of wrap the body and layer it in this linen with a paste of kind of incense around them to keep the smell from being quite as bad. And so that's what's involved in this. But this is all being done very hastily. And so they're rushing to get this done before sunset to take care of this. Any other thoughts in this that I'm missing? Trying to cover several things here, and nope, nothing you have to add. All right, so he's placed in the tomb. Who notices where the tomb's at? The women who are following. They observe where that is taking place at and are aware of that. And so, by the way, they're not the only ones that are aware of that. There will be others that are aware of that as well. Do the Jews know where he's buried? How do we know the Jews know where he was buried? That's right. They're going to ask for a guard to be placed there. So they're going to come to Pilate and ask for that. I want to turn over just briefly and notice something that Dwight said. Let's look in Isaiah 59. I'm sorry, Isaiah 53. Isaiah 53. So in verse 7, would you read 7 through 9 for me?
He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before his shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. He was taken down from he was taken from prison and from judgment, and who will declare his generation? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgressions of my people he was stricken, and they made his grave with the wicked, but with the rich at his death, because he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth.
So at his death, he was numbered with the transgressors. He was killed as a criminal. He was crucified between two thieves. But he was buried like a wealthy man. He was buried in Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. And you have Nicodemus preparing the body here. And so you mentioned that he got respect that he hadn't had before. That's exactly right. But that was prophesied. And so isn't it fascinating that 700 years before, here's God giving the specifics of how this was going to take place, even to knowing who would step forward to provide a place for him to be buried. All right. we do have some details about Joseph's tomb. What do we know about Joseph of Arimathea's tomb? It was in a garden nearby. Very good. No, it was a new tomb. No one had ever been. It was a hewn out tomb as well. Any other detail you know about it? You do know this one. It's probably the most famous feature of Jesus' tomb. It had a stone that was rolled in front of it. We do have there are a number of first century tombs that have been archaeologists have uncovered. This was one that really fits the description. This is not Jesus' tomb. It's not in the same location even. It's not in Jerusalem. But you get an idea of a hewn out tomb. And as they'd find a rock and they would go in and carve out a space for the body to lay in there. And then they'd have a large stone that would be in a track that would be rolled down in front of it and seal it. And this tomb, that stone is probably about this tall. And so you can imagine about that thick. So you can imagine what that would weigh. It's pretty heavy. And to roll it back in place, you have to roll it up the groove, the notch that's carved in there. So that will come into effect in just a little bit. If you were to go inside the tomb, what you would see is you would see on the side there would be a place carved out for them to lay a fresh body. And then on the sides, there would be almost little shelves carved in the stone that would be about this long. And the purpose of that was they would put them in little boxes. The bones, after the body decomposed, they would unwrap and take the bones, and they would place those bones. And the reason those boxes were about that long is because that's about the length of your longest bone in your body, your femur bone. And you could put the whole person's bones in this box, and then you could store these boxes on these little shelves. So families would be buried there generation after generation. And so you would lay out someone there, and they would remain there until the flesh completely decomposed. The bones would be gathered up, put in an ossuary, and then placed on the shelf. And so when you visited the tomb, you were visiting, great grandma, grandma, and so forth, all there. But no one's ever been in this tomb before, brand new for Joseph's family. And now Jesus is going to be the first body that is placed in there. I don't know. Probably for a long time. And now, whether it was exactly the same way or not, because you think all the way back to the time of Abraham, when Abraham bought the plot of ground to bury Sarah and so forth. So that practice is, at least in very similar ways, been around for a long time in Jewish culture.
Joseph wanted his bones brought back from Egypt.
Yes, that's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's right.
Yes, all the secrecy behind him making a disciple of Christ, we want to bring right here also.
Yes, that's exactly right. This is a very brave moment. And it's a brave moment at an unusual time because you didn't have a lot of reason to doubt earlier, but now it's like, what's going on? And that's when these two men step up. And I do think that that's very interesting. And God took notice of it because it's recorded for us in there. All right. Anything else about that? The women notice where the tomb is. The Jews also notice where the tomb is. And on the next day, so what would the next day be? Saturday, the Sabbath. All right. The next day, so all of that takes place on Friday evening, and they get Jesus buried right before dark, and then the next day, the Jewish leadership begins to contemplate something. Let's read in Matthew chapter 27, verse 62 through 66.
On the next day, which followed the day of preparation, the chief priests and Pharisees gathered together to Pilate, and saying, Sir, we remember while he was still alive how that deceiver said, After 3 days I will rise. Therefore, command that the tomb be made secure until the third day, lest his disciples come by night and steal him away, and say to the people, He has risen from the dead. So the last deception will be worse than the first. Pilate said to them, "You have a guard. Go your way. Make it as secure as you know how." So they went and made the tomb secure, sealing the stone and setting the guard.
So what's their concern here? Yeah. Now, why are they concerned about something like this happening? But what did they pick up on? Jesus said he would rise again on the third day. Yes.
Isn't it interesting that they said that he would destroy his temple? And that was one of the reasons they didn't. But here they construed it the correct way.
Yes.
So which one was the truth?
Exactly. So that is an interesting point. So at his trial, they took what he said and made it an accusation. You said you would destroy Herod's temple. But here they recognize, no, what he was really saying is that he would be raised from the dead. Now, what I find even more fascinating than that is who doesn't seem to recognize that or understand that? The ones who spent 3 years with him and actually heard him say those things a number of times. They're not picking up on it. So in some ways, the disciples' faith in Jesus was great enough that it's causing them to overlook some of the things that didn't fit with what they believed about him. Where the Jews are maybe picking up on some of these things because they didn't believe that, that he was the Christ, the Son of God, and therefore he couldn't possibly die. But the apostles just missing that information because it didn't fit with their thinking of the Messiah. And so they're bewildered at this point. They don't seem to be expecting that Jesus made a promise that he would rise after 3 days and that maybe that would happen. But the Jews at least know that Jesus made that claim. And so they're worried about it. They're concerned about it. And so they said, we don't want anything to happen that anybody would ever get the idea that did take place. So we want to make sure that it doesn't. So want the tomb sealed, want a guard in front of it. And what does Pilate say? Go ahead and do it. Oh, Pilate's such an interesting character because look at the information that he's getting. He's already got this information. I believe he's an innocent man. I'm afraid of him because he says he's the Son of God, others say, well, he said that he was the Son of God and that he's a king. And my wife had a dream and said, don't have anything to do with this just man. And now he said he would rise from the dead. Yes, definitely make that tomb secure. And I wonder if he ever checked back to see. Wonder if he ever checked back to see. Anything ever happen after 3 days? And he would have a lot of soul searching to do with some of that. Anything else you want to mention through verse 66?
Doesn't some today even believe that today there's a theory called, is it the swoon theory?
Yeah, the swoon theory is where he didn't really die. He just was so exhausted that he passed out. And so they took him down from the cross, put him in the tomb, then he revived and came out. And therefore everybody thought, oh, he's alive again.
Maybe some of his disciples got him and took him out.
Yeah. So there's the theory that the Jews make popular here. And that is that they came and stole the body. Now that's what they were afraid of. So they did everything to make sure that possibly couldn't happen. And then that is the story that they end up fabricating to tell everybody anyway, because they can't come up with a better one. Yeah, so Dwight, in talking about those different theories of how do we explain the resurrection of Jesus, there are a number of theories that are all pretty far-fetched. And the reason that there are a number of theories that are far-fetched is because the evidence is pretty compelling. So the swoon theory, he wasn't really dead. He was exhausted and passed out. That I could believe. I could see that. They put him in the tomb. He regained some consciousness. I could go that far. Now, what's the rest of the story? He pushes the rock out of the way by himself after how many days? Yeah, after 30, so no food, no water. After this, he can't. He passes out on the cross, and without any type of aid or anything, now he comes to, pushes the rock out of the way, convinces this band of soldiers that he's been raised from the dead, and they're afraid and run away. That doesn't seem very likely at all. So another one is that the disciples come and steal the body. What do you see the problem with that?
They were numb. They were just still up
Yeah,
out of it.
that's exactly right. They don't seem to be in the mood to try to pull something else about that. That continuing with the idea of where the disciples are at. Roman guard. They're going to take on a Roman guard and do this. But by the way, even the Roman guard, what is the story of the Roman guard? We haven't got to it yet, I know, but what? Yeah, okay, that's what the text says. The Roman guard. But what are the Roman guard paid off to say? We were asleep, and they stole the body. Okay. Well, first of all, they were really sleeping to be able to roll a stone out of the way, get the body out without them noticing. Second of all, Roman law for soldiers who fell asleep while guarding was the death. So they would not go around saying that except they had assurance. They had assurance from the high priest that if this gets back to the governor's ears, we will take care of this. But you tell this story. So they tell a story that would be very self-condemning and also highly unlikely, improbable to take place. But going back to the disciples, would that be in character with them? Is there any way that the disciples could steal the body and then claim Jesus was alive and maintain any integrity to everything that they claim to believe? No. So that means they must have forsaken all of their values about that to perpetrate this lie and to make this lie. And then how long do they stick with this lie? Till death. Not many people will die for a lie, knowing it's a lie. And they would know for sure, because if that's the case, they took the body and stole it. They know he's not alive. They know he was dead. And yet they fabricate this and do this and are willing to go to their graves for it. For what profit? What's the benefit of this? Just to admit that they weren't mistaken before? I mean, in other words, the point, we're not going to spend much more time on this, but every theory that you have of how to explain away the resurrection without Jesus actually rising from the dead is harder to believe than the resurrection, that he was really God's son and he really did this. All right, anything else about this?
One thing about rolling away the rock there, there's no handles on the inside to roll that away.
No.
So you couldn't get it
No.
away from the inside.
Yes, that's exactly right. If you look at any of these tombs, you would realize that it would take several strong men to move that stone. And okay, we'll continue on. After the Sabbath, what comes after the Sabbath? First day of the week, which is Sunday. So we're plugging in some things now that we're familiar with, and we're seeing where we got them from. Now, after the Sabbath, it was the first day of the week, and it began to dawn. And Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to see the tomb. So you have a number, by the way, the different texts give a different number of women, and it's not that I think that there's any contradiction there. It's just that one text only focuses on Mary Magdalene. It's just talking about what she saw and how she returned and talked to the disciples. The other text may mention a few other, and one text says, and others as well went with them. So as early as possible on Sunday morning, they're headed to the tomb. What are they headed to the tomb to do? That's right. Friday night, you had Nicodemus who brought some spices, but it was a really hurried and rushed event. So they are coming back as early as possible, as soon as the law would allow them to come back and to finish the preparation of the body. And so they're coming as it began to dawn, right at daybreak. And so they come, and verse 2 through 4. Would you read that, please?
And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven, and came and rolled back the stone from the door, and sat on it. His countenance was like lightning, and his clothing as white as snow. And the guards shook for fear of him, and became like dead men.
All right, so a terrifying moment where an angel appears, rolls the stone back. By the way, it only took one angel to roll the stone. That makes sense. And the guard falls to the ground, fainting, it seems like, becomes like dead men on that. And here is the resurrection process. And there was an earthquake. So the women are on their way. I wonder if they felt the ground quake in that. They certainly didn't see what was taking place here with the angel rolling back the stone or the guards or anything of that nature. Let's turn over to Mark 16 and notice a few verses here. Mark 16, verses let's just read verses 1 through 8, and we'll go back and talk about it a little bit.
Now, when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices that they might come and anoint him. Very early in the morning, on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. And they said among themselves, "Who will roll away the stone from the door of the tomb for us?" But when they looked up, they saw that the stone had been rolled away, for it was very large. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man clothed in a long white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him? But go tell his disciples and Peter that he was going before you into Galilee. There you will see him, as he said to you." So they went out quickly and fled from the tomb, for they trembled and were amazed. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid.
All right, so we've got some details here in Mark. We're going to look at some details that Luke records for us that fit along with that. But they're on their way to the tomb, and what's their concern on the way to the tomb? How are we going to move that big stone? So here's the thing. When they're considering that, they do not yet know several things. They don't know that the tomb was sealed. They don't know that there's a Roman guard supposed to be guarding the tomb. But I don't think the Roman guard's there anymore. I think that the earthquake and the angel has already rolled away the stone. Jesus has already been resurrected, and the guard has already fled at this point. And so when they arrive there, they look, and there's nobody there that they see from the outside, but the stone has been rolled away. That's disturbing to them. And so as they go and look inside the tomb, what do they see? A young man, and I assume this is an angel. Maybe the angel that rolled away the stone, I don't know. But he's there, and they are upset about this. And he says, "Do not be alarmed." Let me read from Luke's account this same thing. It says in Luke 24, in verse 3, "They went in and did not find the body of Jesus. And it happened as they were there and greatly perplexed about this, behold, 2 men stood by them in shining garments." So Luke records that there were 2, not just 1. And then as they were afraid and bowing their faces to the earth, they said to them, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but he is risen. Remember how he spoke to you when he was still in Galilee, saying the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and the 3rd day rise again." And they remembered his words. So the Sanhedrin council remembered that he said he would rise after 3 days. They had forgotten this. And an angel has to remind them, "Don't you remember when he was in Galilee that he told you that this was going to happen?" And so this angel informs them that that's what is going to take place here. Any thoughts before we move on? Now, what do they do after receiving this message? They get out of there. Where do you think they're going? They're going to tell the disciples about this. They're going to tell the disciples about this. So they're fleeing and going on to tell the disciples. Let's see. I don't know where I want to be with my slides. We'll just stay right there for now. Let's go over to John's account now. John chapter 20 in verse 1. And we're going to pick up with Mary Magdalene's perspective of this. And we're going to take, let's just do verses 1 and 2 right now.
Now, on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb early, while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. Then she ran and came to Simon Peter and to the other disciple whom Jesus loved, and said to them, They have taken away the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him.
All right, so the details here are slightly different, and it just focuses on Mary Magdalene. Now, Mary Magdalene was mentioned with the other ladies that came. I don't know that that means that she was in other words, in the same procession with them there. It may have been that she was 15 minutes ahead of them or whatever. You do notice that what does it say here about the time of day when she comes? It was still dark, all right? I don't know that that's different because it seems to be that it's the time where it's getting light, when it's dawning and the sun is coming up. Maybe the same time. It may indicate she was slightly ahead of them. What is different about her account is she doesn't seem to see the angels here because she doesn't get the explanation. So it seems that she gets there either in the front of the procession or slightly ahead of the rest of the women, sees that the stone is rolled away, is concerned about this, turns around and runs back. And who's she going to tell? Peter and John. And so she runs back and tells Peter and John. And let's read verse. We already read verse 2?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So let's read verses 3 and through 7.
Peter therefore went out, and the other disciple, and were going to the tomb. So they both ran together, and the other disciple outran Peter, and came to the tomb first. And he, stooping down and looking in, saw the linen clothes laying there, yet he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came following him, and went into the tomb, and he saw the linen cloths lying there, and the handkerchief that had been around his head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded together in a place by itself.
Okay, so she doesn't come with the explanation that I saw the angels. The angel said that he's not here, he's risen, and to remember what he told us in Galilee. So she didn't seem to see that at this point. So she saw that the stone was rolled away, immediately turned, went to Peter and John, told them. Peter and John come running to see. When Peter and John get there, by this point, the other women have already seen the angels and are returning to tell the disciples, but Peter and John are there, and who do they see around? Nobody. So they look in the tomb, and what do they see? Yeah. Now, what's odd about that? All right, let's put this together with the story that the Jews are going to be telling. The disciples came and stole the body. So we sneak in and we find the Roman guard sleeping. And so we move the stone quietly as possible out of the way. And we go in and we decide to unwrap Jesus, unwrap the body, fold up the handkerchief that was over his face, and then take the corpse out. Is that how you would do that? And so here's the thing. What we have to do with the Bible is we either have to reject this as, well, all of this is made up anyway. This whole story is made up. What people want to do is they say, well, no, I think some of these details are accurate here, but it couldn't have possibly happened this way. If we're going to take the details that are here as accurate, then and apply it to the story, then we have to see what makes sense with the story. Otherwise, if we're going to deny that, then just deny the whole thing. And yet most people are not willing to do that. So it's interesting to me how people who want to discredit the Bible like to take most of the Bible, and then what the parts that bother them, they'll want to change those parts. Either accept it or reject it, but I don't think it does any good to accept most of it and then try to explain away other parts. And so here the details are given, and if we accept those details, it doesn't make sense that the body was stolen here. So what do Peter and John think about this? This is very perplexing to them, though, of what is going on here. Has somebody taken the body? What is happening? John, it does say John saw and he believed. He believed that the body was gone, and maybe it's believing that Jesus is raised from the dead. But verse 9 says what? Yeah, they're not grasping that he must rise from the dead. And so where do John and Peter go? They go back to their home. They go back to their home. All right. Now, Mary Magdalene is the one who got there, saw the stone was rolled away, ran back and told Peter and John. Peter and John run. The other women have seen the angels. They have now tried to go back and tell the other disciples. Peter and John were there at that time. Mary Magdalene comes back to the tomb, probably following Peter and John behind them. And Peter and John go back to their house. Mary stays there at the tomb. And so now there's nobody there but Mary outside the tomb. And what's she doing? She's crying. She's weeping, stooping down. And she looks in the tomb. And as she looks in the tomb, there are the two angels again. And so let's see what they say. Let's read verses 12 through 12 and 13.
And she saw the two angels in white, sitting one at the head and the other at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. Then they said to her, Woman, why are you weeping? She said to them, Because they have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him.
Now, she's concerned. She recognized them as angels? I don't know. I'm not sure if she does or not. Her response seems to just be like, I don't know what's going on here. Somebody's taken away my Lord. So does she believe that he's raised from the dead? No. It doesn't seem that she does. She just assumes that somebody has. By the way, what does she know? Is this Jesus' tomb? She knows that's where Jesus was buried, but it's not Jesus' tomb. It's Joseph. And so I think what she's thinking at this point is, I guess we didn't have permission to do this, and somebody said, nope, that body's not staying in this tomb, and removes it. So she doesn't know what is going on here. And so let's read 14 through 16.
Now when she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, and did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking? She, supposing him to be the gardener, said to him, Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away. Jesus said to her, Mary. She turned and said to him, Rabboni, which is to say, teacher.
Yeah. So she's thinking that I guess the person taking care of these grounds has taken him away. And so just tell me where he is, and I'll get the body. And so she's just upset about this whole debacle that's taking place here. And Jesus says, Mary. And she realizes who it is. Who's the first person that Jesus appears to after his resurrection? Not Peter, not John, but Mary Magdalene. And she's beside herself in this. And she says, Rabboni, which is to say, teacher, master in this. All right, let's finish up 17 and 18.
Jesus said to her, Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father, but go to my brethren and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, and to my God and your God. Mary Magdalene came and told the disciples that she had seen the Lord and that he had spoken these things to her.
All right, what's her response, apparently, besides just saying, Rabboni? Yes, she's whole. Can you imagine? Can you imagine thinking, well, he's dead, and now I don't even know where his body is until, oh, you're alive in here, and she clings to it. And he says to her, do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father. In other words, I think what he's saying there is, I'm not leaving just yet. And so you don't have to just hold on to me like you'll never see me again. I'm going to be around a little bit before I ascend to the Father. And so kind of easing her concern about that. And go and tell my brethren. So the women are on the way to tell what the angel said, that he was risen. But now Mary Magdalene has seen the risen Lord and is supposed to go tell the disciples. And she does, and she comes and tells them these things. And the other women will be telling the other apostles as well. And do you know what their response is going to be? Crazy women. These crazy women. All right, we'll pick up there next time. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact